Hey everyone, it's Evan Kirstel with an amazing guest, Jim Brisimitzis from the 5G Open Innovation Lab up in Seattle. Jim, how are you?
Doing fantastic, Evan, and thank you again for your time this morning and for this opportunity.
Well,
Appreciate it.
thanks for chatting. We've been following each other on social media for some time, and I've been really intrigued by you and what your team is doing. So let's dive right in with an introduction. Tell us what the 5G Open Innovation Lab is all about and a
Sure,
little bit about your background.
sure. So there is a phenomenal software opportunity in the world of 5G and edge computing. And unfortunately, there isn't really an ecosystem being built around that. So the goal of the 5G Open Innovation Lab really was to build a multi-stage, multi-partner ecosystem that can explore what's possible for CSPs in the software ecosystem as they continue to push forward with their 5G expansion plans. In the past, as you can probably appreciate, Evan, there's been a lot of software opportunities that have been created on previous generations of wireless standards, 4GLT being the biggest recently. Not much has been really happening by way of the CSPs and their participation in that. So we've set out to build the 5G Open Innovation Lab as an innovation network that connects startups with global platforms and CSPs and also enterprise customers. We'll dig a little deeper in that. Since we launched, we've had 87 multi-stage teams come through our program from all over the world. We're 100% virtual. These teams have gone on to raise $1.34 billion of venture capital, both before joining our program and post the program as well. And we're proud to have 18 global partners around the world that are involved in selecting the teams and mentoring the teams and being an integral part of our program.
Amazing. That's quite an accomplishment. Tell us about your background. What led you to create, the 5G Innovation Lab?
Sure. So started my career at Nortel Networks in Toronto, Canada, where I'm from. Was there.
Oh, that's a blast from the past. Oh my.
Yeah, absolutely. I was at Nortel in its massive heydays when 30% of the Toronto Stock Exchange valuation was based on Nortel. Left a little bit before its eventual downturn and joined a firm called PeopleSoft, if you remember the old ERP days. And in 2003 decided to move to Pleasanton, California, and work for PeopleSoft, then Oracle, and then I got a recruiting call from Microsoft. So my wife and I moved from Pleasanton in 2005 to the Seattle area. I've been here ever since. I was at Microsoft for almost 14 years. But if you look back in the span of my careers, I sort of started off in the wireline, early 4G days of telecommunications, way back in the day. This is around the previous dot-com boom, if you will. And then I've been in big platforms ever since. And no better place to learn the platform business than at Microsoft, right? With all of its platform assets from Windows Server to Xbox to Windows, Office, to Azure recently. And so I learned a lot. And as I was running the Microsoft for Startups program in the US and then in Canada, my team and I worked with over 2,800 startups, from Y Combinator to 500 startups to Techstars. And I recognized two things. One is there's something quite powerful about platforms and the value that people can build on top of those platforms. So that was sort of idea number one when it came to 5G. In my humble opinion, 5G can very much be a platform. And then the second big thing that I realized was that that every startup really had an ecosystem of various partners that throughout the course of their growth would interact with, build with, would do business with. And despite the fact that I was proudly carrying the Microsoft flag into the startup ecosystems across the United States and Canada, oftentimes Microsoft had a role in the success of the startup, but those startups were often working with other players as well. And so I grew up in a world where platforms really mattered. I was part of a team that helped to launch the initial version of Microsoft Ventures. And then I helped to reboot Microsoft's developer relations in the startup world with Microsoft for Startups, previously known as BizSpark. And Daniel Lewin had run that quite successfully at Microsoft for many years. And so I learned a lot from him and took a lot of those learnings forward. And then around 2018, funny story, I was just watching yet another ad about how great 5G was going to be. And I was kind of curious about what it really was, beyond the speeds and feeds and our lives improving in sort of this world. I was really curious what was happening behind the scenes. And that's when I discovered that through reading 3GPP standards release 15 document, what I realized was that carriers were going very much through the transformation. Their networks were moving away from monolithic systems to more cloud native systems. And that's actually quite compelling and interesting when you think about it, Evan, because it's long been said that 4G LTE was a huge opportunity for the software ecosystem, but those who were traversing those bits between our mobile devices and the app ecosystem, the CSP, really didn't play a big role in the upside of that success. In fact, their ARPU continued to drop through the 4G LTE days, and perhaps even still in 5G. That it's too early to dictate if that's going to happen or not. But I saw that as an opportunity. I also saw at my time at Microsoft that cloud computing was obviously very successful and very popular, but more and more use cases were requiring compute to be located close to where users were. So those were the early days of where edge is. And any given CSP today in any given country has both spectrum, has potential 5G network capabilities, and inherently has an edge. If you think about it, several of these CSPs have thousands of points of presence around the countries for which they do business in, and those points of presence could be great edge locations. The hyperscalers are already pushing into the edge with their announcements. AWS announced Outpost with Wavelength as an example. Microsoft has the Azure Stack Edge and all of its PMEC capabilities that they're coming out to market with, and Google's got Anthos. And so the edge is a real platform opportunity. That ain't going away. In fact, it's going to grow to become even quite more substantial than it is today. And I firmly believe the CSPs have this very unique position because they have both the connectivity and the presence to do that. What they really didn't have was much success in developer relations, and that was primarily because they approached developer relations from the context of connectivity. And while connectivity is important, it's a small part of the stack. There's so much more to the stack from an application standpoint. So I brought cloud perspective, I brought platform perspective to the table through the 5G Open Innovation Lab, and together we're building out this very open ecosystem. And again, 87 teams from seed to Series C stage that have been involved in it since.
Wow, that's an amazing story. And tell us, just out of your curiosity, I'm not from Seattle, love the city. Is the area becoming the hotbed for wireless innovation between, Amazon and Microsoft and T-Mobile and all the startups you work with? You've been there for a while. What's going on locally?
So there's a couple of things at play here that really sets the Seattle area apart from Silicon Valley, Silicon Beach down in LA, New York City, Tel Aviv, and other startup hubs around.
Boston, shout out to Boston. Well, we do Boston, a little bit.
Obviously, yep. So one of the things is undisputedly we are the cloud capital of the world. Undisputedly. I mean, started with Amazon and AWS, and then of course Microsoft's had some very big gains of their own. And Seattle is, without a doubt, where the cloud epicenter is. In fact, Google actually has a pretty big presence for GCP in South Lake Union, just across the street from Amazon's main campus area. So the cloud is really has been built here, and it continues to attract significant amounts of investments from even non-Seattle-based players like Google. I'm in an area in Bellevue, Washington, which is just across the pond from Seattle, Lake Washington. And we have 4 buildings around us that are all occupied by Meta, and 2 more buildings that are being built by Meta around us. So there's this significantly concentrated tech talent here in Seattle that has historical roots in cloud computing, now metaverse and others, and we're seeing an influx of other players who are non-Seattle natives locating here. Google, Facebook, or Meta rather, Apple, and other big players are locating up here. So that's really interesting. If you go back to the early days of our wireless heritage here in the United States, Craig McCaw and Clearwire, Western Wireless, these are all players that essentially started the wireless business here in the Seattle area as well. And in fact, Deutsche Telekom, now I'm drawing a blank on the company they bought, but they essentially bought a wireless provider here that now has become T-Mobile, and T-Mobile is based here in Bellevue as well. So if you trace back to the early roots of the wireless industry, Seattle actually had a pretty big play in the formation of the wireless industry here. And obviously the rest has been history. Wireless has been a booming industry here in the United States generally. So when you bring computing and connectivity together, you've got this killer combination that makes Seattle very different. And in many cases, it's not to the scale of a Silicon Valley or Silicon Beach or Boston or New York. It's its own sort of ecosystem. But uniquely, this is the place where cloud computing was born, and in many respects, the roots of the wireless industry were also born here as well. And that's what makes Seattle very different as a location. Now, that said, we started our program, our first ever batch of the 6 batches we've run started on May 4th of 2020. If you remember, Evan, that was shortly after the big lockdown started with COVID. Yeah. So we always knew we'd have a physical presence by way of our partnerships with T-Mobile. But COVID really forced us to move the program into virtual. And looking back, it was actually an awesome outcome for us, because now we work with teams from Tel Aviv, Israel, several of them actually. We have several teams from Europe, lots of teams from across the US and Canada. And now we're breaking into other regions like South America and eventually the Asia Pacific area as well. So going virtual has actually been a boom for us in our program. And it's allowed us to actually work with several very smart teams from all over the world that use Seattle as a place to start their adventure, but not necessarily the end destination. It's a place to start.
Oh, absolutely. So, we're so interconnected these days. And we mentioned a lot of the tech giants over the last couple of minutes. But tell us about this startup or early stage company opportunity. Traditionally, wireless wasn't a playground for those folks. It was sort of a black hole, a black box. It was tough to get a business going unless you had tons of capital and infrastructure and all kinds of things. So are you seeing the network opening up to more and more early stage?
Well, that's the hope, Evan. That really is the hope longer term. But before we get into that, VoiceStream was the team that Deutsche Telekom, the organization.
Yes, remember it well. Yeah,
just popped in my head. Okay, so then the big question is, where's the opportunity in 5G? And I'm probably not the most popular guy for saying this, but in my humble opinion, the biggest opportunity for 5G is not in the consumer space, a traditional stronghold for many of the CSPs around the world. The biggest opportunity for 5G is in enterprise. Clear and simple, in my opinion. And enterprises are now looking at connectivity by way of cellular as a differentiation, as an additive to their wireless strategy today, which mostly is Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi and cellular are going to coexist, in my opinion, down the road today. In the US, thanks to the FCC, they unlocked a band of spectrum called CBRS that made it possible for enterprises who wanted to go build their own private cellular networks to do so. Is it the end game longer term? Not that particular band, but I anticipate that more and more publicly available spectrum will be made available so that you'll see better and faster performance off these wireless cellular networks. So if I'm a CSP today, my business is shifting and changing. All of a sudden, I become pretty interesting and pretty important to the enterprise world for various reasons. One, of course, is connectivity, and this whole private cellular network world is really going to grow into something much, much bigger than it is today. That's obvious. But behind those networks, it's just like our phones. Behind the phones, why do we buy the phones? We buy them for the camera, we buy them for the apps, and that's the most important piece. So behind these wireless networks is going to be a very large ecosystem of applications that are digitizing supply chain, that are creating robotic capabilities for warehousing, whatever the use case.
Oh, I think we may have had a minor glitch.
Those
So we had a minor glitch. We lost maybe 10 seconds of audio and video. Are you there, Jim?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I assume you're running on a wired or wireless or 5G connection. What?
I'm actually wired. I am running off of Wi-Fi 6.
We'll wait for 7 to get the QoS we really need. But yeah, this is the beauty of live streaming, is you never know what's going to happen. Right. So walk us through the process of a startup coming in, or early stage company coming in through the door. Like, what's the flow? What's the engagement?
Sure. So we're very much a partner engaged program. So when you come visit our space, you'll see 18 different logos on the wall. These aren't folks that are just sponsoring a program. They're actively engaged in all aspects of it. So for instance, today, for batch 7. Our batch 7 will start. Is all good?
You're back. Yep.
Can you hear me okay, Evan? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, great. So we're kicking off interviews for batch 7 that start in March of 2023. And the interviews will be with the startups and 18 of our partners sitting on the call interviewing these teams. And it's a great forum, not just for the teams to get interviewed by our partners, but for the teams to also assess, right? Is this the right use of their time? Is this the right program? Could they see themselves engaging with these partners on go-to-market engagements, POCs, maybe joint product development, something, right? So our partners are very much involved in the selection of our teams. And we'll go through about 20 to 25 interviews before we select somewhere between 13 to 16 teams for this next batch that starts in March of next year. The partners will then vote collectively on those teams. And that's actually critical for us because what it does is it helps to even the playing field. Right now, our partners are not competing with each other, but they are bringing competing perspectives, right? Microsoft sees the world very differently from Intel. Intel sees the world very differently from SK Telecom. SK Telecom sees the world very differently from VMware. So as a partner, you get the chance to not just bring your perspectives and your priorities to the table, you get to balance those priorities and perspectives out with people that are sort of outside of your world as well. And I think that's tremendously powerful for a partner because so often it's very easy for us to be stuck in our silos. But in this process, you're sort of looking at other people's priorities and counterbalancing yours against that. What we have found is now after 6 batches, a partner may not particularly see a fit to work with a team in that particular batch. But several batches later, they're going back and saying, hey, our priorities have changed. You're interesting. We'd love to work with you. And we've seen that time and time again play out. Once the teams are selected, in the first 2 weeks of our 12-week program, they'll come back and meet with our partners in a similar format. But for an hour, they'll go through the outcomes that they want to drive. So if I'm a team, I might join that call and say, here are the technical go-to-market and venture outcomes I'd like to go drive. The venture outcomes we will drive through our venture community, but the technical and go-to-market outcomes is a conversation that they're having with our partners in real time. So I'll make this up. A startup might say, hey, Spirent, we would like to partner with you on this area. And Spirent would have a chance to say, yeah, that makes sense. We'd like to do that. Or, hey, that does make sense, but let's take this offline. We'd like to learn more. Or a startup might say, hey, Nokia, we'd like to partner with you on X. Or hey, Accenture, we have this big customer opportunity. We'd like to partner with you on that. And the list goes on and on. So the startups actually have the ability to set their own goals and the outcomes. One of the things I learned at working with 26 of the best incubators and accelerators and co-working spaces here in the United States and Canada was when you give startups the freedom to decide and to drive on the activities that really matter for them, the outcomes for them are tenfold more beneficial longer term. And more importantly, you engage partners in the right way because these are all shared outcomes that they'll eventually have. So we put the power of the startups setting their own agendas in their own hands. And by doing so, they're bringing along partners. And this is all opt-in, right? We don't agenda, but they bring those partners along that common chain. As a result, all good?
Yep, got it. We had a little glitch. Let's dive into the. Yep.
Is it
Yeah, I can see and hear you now. Let's dive into the tech stack that you've built. So you're looking at the RF side, core network. What functions Have you built
So
out there?
right behind here is our own CBRS based private network, and then over here is our own edge stack, and then we also have a second network that we're building out. This network here is GenXCom that we're running on this side here. It's a 4G based CBRS network, and you can see it's got another repeater over here. So we actually run our startup solutions here. We also run a lot of our tech stacks from our partners as well. We've created a lab environment that's highly configurable. Based on the use case, based on the proof of concept requirements, we can reconfigure the stack behind us and allow for that collaboration to happen both with our startups and our partners, but more importantly, startups with any customers if they're running any POC engagements as well. So we facilitate a lot of that here. We also have 2 operating farms where we have our own private networks that are out in the field. And I love those environments because those are production environments. These aren't just mock-up environments. These are production environments where our startups could really bring their capabilities and use cases to bear in a commercial setting and actually get real feedback at a commercial level. And that's highly valuable to any team. I don't care what the stage.
Yeah, no, that's super, super interesting.
To get that hands-on customer perspective.
Absolutely.
All the times that I've used StreamYard, this is the first time I've seen some of the interruptions happen out. It's usually
well, I'm in a Hilton hotel, so Wi-Fi is probably best effort at best. We need some CBRS here or something ASAP. But we'll power through it.
Sure will.
Tell me what are some of the IoT edge use cases that your partners and customers are there particular verticals or industries they're going after? I know you're on the kind of bleeding edge of things.
Transformations include oil and gas, energy. The energy sector generally is pretty invested in this space. Manufacturing, discrete process-based manufacturing is also quite strong in this space in terms of their spending and interest. Distribution, transportation, logistics, everything from ports, truck lines to rail, distribution centers are all increasing their spend on a combination of applications, connectivity, edge computing, because it's important to their ability to become more efficient. And this point has been elaborated by the COVID pandemic, right? When we went into lockdown and you took people out of processes, all of a sudden enterprises were held hostage to the circumstances that they are in. We have partnerships on the systems integration side with Accenture, Avanade, and Deloitte. And if you talk to all 3 of them, they would suggest and also support that enterprises largely are now spending quite a bit of money on their IT strategies to build resiliency in their operations so that the next disruption, global disruption, whatever that may be, they don't have such an unresilient environment that they can actually respond to those market forces and not see what we're seeing today in supply chain restrictions and all these other issues. And so those are the 3 big sectors that we've seen an increase of spending, both whether it's around private cellular networking or connectivity generally, or applications that demand compute and latency performance, or new sets of applications. There's a number of our teams that are providing solutions in those areas. Another area that I see a sort of a surge of interest is in augmented reality in the enterprise world. We have 2 teams that are actually doing quite well in that space. Tactile being one, actually 3. FutureSight being another, and then Proximity has now raised over $100 million, providing augmented reality for surgeons. So while they're in surgery, they can provide, or they can tap expertise from anyone around the world and help improve the patient's care and outcomes longer term. Tactile doing something very similar, as is FutureSight AR, with field and remote workers as well. So AR is, in my opinion, there was an early time where AR was really fun science experiment technology for enterprises that are adopting augmented reality as part of their common workflows and the way that they do their business. And that to me is also quite exciting as well. Then we have a number of teams that are doing really interesting things as well. Pano was featured recently with T-Mobile. Pano has set up 360-degree AI-driven cameras around fire hotspots here up and down the West Coast for early detection of wildfires. 80% of their AI helps to identify when wildfire is starting. Halo car is another area. Las Vegas, look up Halo car. It'll be teleoperated to you. Nobody's in the car. Someone's driving remotely. You get in, drive yourself around, eventually leave the car where your destination is, and someone will teleoperate it to the next ride. So we're seeing a lot of those new capabilities. But again, those are capabilities that are really cool use cases, but the demand that those use cases have on reliant connectivity, high-speed reliant connectivity is really important. And then, of course, edge computing. Those two sectors of technology, Evan, are quite compelling pieces of technology. When you bring those two together, amazing things can really happen. And just to close that thought out, this is where I think the CSPs could really make a difference in their 5G adventures.
Yeah, super exciting time. What are you most excited about as we end up the year? And, a little bit longer term, how do you see the lab evolving into either adjacent areas or additional value-added capabilities?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm most excited about is when I first started the lab, there was a general belief that carriers will probably run the same playbook in 4G or 5G as they did in 4G. That there really isn't going to be an ecosystem for software developers to a lot of pushback. I'm quite excited because we're starting to, in a slow way, but we're starting to really chip away at showing what's possible, and it's starting to turn some perspectives. We started off our relationship with T-Mobile back in 2019 and launched our first program with them in 2020. We're quite proud of the fact that we now have a partnership with SK Telecom out of South Korea. We're also quite proud of other CSP relationships that we haven't formally announced yet, but we will be in the future. So that ecosystem is actually growing quite healthily. There's still skepticism. Even I have skepticism from time to time, but nonetheless, I think we're starting to show that there's a coexistence of a software ecosystem with where connectivity is going. And this adoption in the industry, we're pretty excited. We have orders, so we're pursuing that. So they around the world, so we're pretty excited about that. And then we have a number of our teams. We've had 5 exited teams since our program launched. Mixcom being the biggest, $135 million acquisition from Silver Semiconductor. And then a number of teams have gone on to raise significant amounts of capital, even in the downturn. We're starting, our teams continue to command some good dollars on the capital side, and so we're pretty excited about that. We've been slowly working away at launching our own sidecar fund, and I think 2023 is going to be the year where we're going to have a small fund where we can invest in directly. We've been dabbling in investments on our own. We have our own angel list rolling fund syndicate that any accredited investor could join today. We've already deployed capital raised from that to 6 different teams, and there's a handful of additional teams that we're making investments in as well. So we're quite excited about this ecosystem, the prospects of it, both in its expansion capabilities, the impact it's creating in the industry, and then in future our ability to make investments as well directly in these teams. So it's been a 2.5-year journey. We built something that people said, look, the telephone companies are dying, don't waste your time. One thing is for certain, Evan, regardless of where you kind of sit in this continuum, software will always play a very big role in ecosystems, bar none. It doesn't matter if you're a software shop or if you're a big enterprise, you're going to be using software in some way, shape, or form. And we've become a destination for software developers who are solving those harder problems and looking at this intersection of connectivity and edge computing as a place to be doing that with. And from that standpoint, we're quite proud of our progress and still lots to come in the next coming year.
Lots to come indeed. Well, very exciting. So many updates, so much innovation. I'm sure I'll see you at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona around the corner. So I look forward to, maybe we'll do an MWC update. But congratulations, onwards and upwards. It's amazing work.
Yeah, thank you, Evan, and thanks for inviting us to be part of your big platform as well. It means a lot to us and to help raise the story of what we're working here in the lab. So I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to spend it with us.
Likewise, despite the bad Wi-Fi, we did it. We powered through, and this is, if not illustration of why we need Wi-Fi 6 and 5G in the enterprise, and a hotel is an enterprise. I don't know what is. When you get better internet at home than anywhere in any business, the time is nigh. So thanks so much, Jim. Great chatting, and look forward to your updates.
Thanks for having me. See you next time.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.